If you have your Bibles, turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 3. It will also be on the screen, or if you want to use a Bible app or anything like that, 1 Samuel chapter 3 to get us going. Also, just want to say Happy Father's Day to everyone. And if we've never met, my name is Matt. Glad to have you here. If we as a church can help or serve you in any way, please let us know after the service. We'll be hanging in the back and would love to connect with you. But 1 Samuel chapter 3 is going to set us up for the conversation we're having today. Let me just give you a little background, so we're not just jumping into a couple verses without maybe you knowing the context. So at this point in time in the history of the Israelite people, this is one of those dark kind of seasons, moments. There's like a lot of spiritual weird things going on. As a nation, they're really far from God. They are kind of doing whatever they think is right in their own eyes, is kind of the idea, the phrase. And even within like the religious, the establishment, the very mechanism that God has set up within the tabernacle and the priestly order, there's all kinds of dysfunction, which we'll read a little bit about. And so high priest Eli is, he's still doing his duty, but his family is falling apart. His sons who are working have like sinned in like really terrible ways. And so there's this real darkness over kind of everything that's happening at this point in time. There's also this woman named Hannah who has been desperate to have a child, and she has been unable. And so at one point in the story, she comes and she pleads before God, if you just give me a son, I'll dedicate him back to you to be of your service. And as the story goes, she was able to give birth, and she named him Samuel. And when he was weaned, which culturally would have been around 3 or 4 years old, she presents him back to the kind of the priestly order, to Eli, the high priest, to help raise, and he now is serving. And Samuel, if you know that name, represents this hope that even in the bleakness and the darkness and the sin that is kind of gripping the culture and the time, the people, that there's a sense of this new awareness and this desire to connect back in with God. So that's all that's happening here. And now we're going to read this, 1 Samuel chapter 3. It says this. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel served the Lord by assisting Eli, who is the high priest. And this, I should have said that at this point in time, he's probably 8 or 9 years old. So from the time 3 or 4 to now 8 or 9. So he's been in this rhythm of serving and assisting and being raised in the priestly order. His age isn't important, but his innocence and his openness to the voice of God is the thing to pay attention to. Then it goes on. Now in those days, messages from the Lord were very rare, and visions were quite uncommon. One night, Eli, who was almost blind by now, had gone to bed. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping in the tabernacle near the ark of God. If you don't know what the tabernacle is, this was the portable, just think of it as a portable church. It was this tent structure with different sections that they would move around as a nation when they were nomadic, traveling people. And they would use that. It represented the place where God's presence would dwell among the people. It's a foreshadowing, if you will, of Jesus coming in and living among his people. So this represented kind of the center where they would offer their offerings and sacrifices and ask for forgiveness for sin. It was kind of the center of the nation. And so Samuel, as a boy, is now sleeping and living within this tabernacle, within this portable church. Verse 4, suddenly the Lord called out, Samuel. Yes, Samuel replied, what is it? He got up and ran to Eli. Here I am, call me. I didn't call you, Eli replied. Go back to bed. So he did. Verse 6, then the Lord called out again, Samuel. Again, Samuel got up and went to Eli. Here I am, did you call me? I did not call you, my son, Eli said. Go back to bed. Kind of feel like a parent who's just trying to sleep and that toddler keeps coming in, you know? Verse 7, Samuel did not yet know the Lord because he had never had a message from the Lord before. So the Lord called a third time. And once more Samuel got up and went to Eli. Here I am. Did you call me? Then Eli realized it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So he said to Samuel, go and lie down again. And if someone calls again, say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So Samuel went back to bed. Verse 10, and the Lord came and called as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel replied, speak, your servant is listening. I want to draw your attention back to verse 2. There's a phrase, or verse 3, it says the phrase, the lamp of God had not yet gone out. We can think about that in a couple ways. There's different ways, and they're all good in different ways. Just in a physical, structural way, if we think about the tabernacle, according to Old Testament law and practice, they would light a lamp in the tabernacle that would burn all night long. And so it was just a part of what it meant to honor the light and have it burning in the tabernacle. So when verse 3 says the light of the Lord had not yet gone out, the lamp of God had not yet gone out, it could just simply be referring to that the lamp was still burning, that it was not yet dawn. So it was kind of, it's always darkest before the dawn. Maybe that's when he's hearing this voice of God. On a spiritual level, there's lots of implications too, that in this moment and season and time for the nation and the culture where things were so bleak and dark spiritually, that the lamp of God had not yet gone out. There was still this flame. There was still a God who was longing to connect with his people, to reach out. And we see this in this story, that it's not the high priest he reaches out to, it's this 8 or 9-year-old boy that God is calling. And his response after he figures that out is, your servant is listening. That idea of listening is something we want to talk about today. So we've been in this series on spiritual disciplines, and last week I introduced you to my friend VJ. Again, we wish he could have been here in person, but this is another conversation I really want you to hear with a man named Mark Harris, who's my own spiritual director. Sometimes when we think about walking with Jesus and growing in intimacy with Jesus, we categorize it into two kind of extreme polar opposites. We think of the things we do just on our own, in the quiet of our house or in the car, or our own reading, our own study, and then we think of showing up in a corporate way for church like this. But there's something about including each other's in our journey that is central to the way God has wired us to be able to hear and to listen together. And so this story of Eli and Samuel is just a small example of Samuel not recognizing the voice of God. Of course, he's just a child. But Eli eventually knowing and helping him tune into what God was saying to him. And spiritual direction is this practice. All the practices, all the disciplines we've talked about are been rooted in the historic church as ways for us to continue to grow in our faith, to understand who Jesus is. Not just reading the text, but getting to know the person of Jesus. And so whether it's prayer or fasting or community, all these things we've been talking about, direction is another practice the church has used. It's this idea of listening together for the voice of God. And so if you've ever been in a season where you feel like God is distant or quiet, or things in your spiritual life feel dry or bleak, sometimes we need another person around us to help us see and to hear what's happening. And the same thing's true for me. Sometimes I think that some people may think, it must be always okay for you in your prayer life or in your kind of study and growth with Jesus. And it's not. There's different seasons. And so I'm going to introduce you to Mark Harris, who I met just over, about a year ago. About a year ago when I was on that one retreat out at Bayside Camp. And I would have loved to have him here to talk, to encourage you on what it means to have spiritual friendships and companionships. I think we all need them. We all need safe places to express our doubts and our concerns, but also people to help us tune in and to listen. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So without further ado, here's Mark Harris to lead us in this idea of thinking.
Well, thanks, Mark, for joining us. Really excited to have you here. And just by way of quick introduction, before I get you to kind of introduce yourself, I first met Mark, just so everyone knows, last spring over at Bayside Camp on that retreat for pastors and ministry leaders. And I've shared with the church before that 24 hours of complete silence, even eating, that was honestly, Mark, my favorite part. I wanted that to go much, much longer. I think a lot of people wanted it to end, but that's when we first met and then connected again after that. And now you've been walking with me as my spiritual director now for the past, I guess since September. So not that long, but yeah, so I'm really excited to introduce you to the church, but also to have this conversation around spiritual direction, the practice of walking with people in their own in spiritual journeys. As part of this series where we've been leaning in on these different ancient spiritual disciplines and practices that help us connect and grow deeper in intimacy with Jesus. So anyways, before we jump into all that, Mark Harris, explain or introduce yourself, who you are, where you live in Atlantic Canada, hobbies, family, whatever you'd like to do to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, no, let me just say it was a pleasure to meet you back then, and it's been great to journey together. Yeah. I live in the Halifax area, just 20 minutes outside the city, living near the ocean, which is a great joy for me. And actually, part of the reason my wife and I moved out here is we feel close to God when we're by the ocean, and count it a great joy to be here. So we're retired or semi-retired, and but very much continue to be parents to three grown kids, and we have four grandkids who
Okay.
all live in this area at this point, which is really wonderful. So that's a pretty huge part of my calling these
Mm,
days, which I love. Yeah, continue to do ministry of spiritual formation, spiritual direction. I was a pastor for many years, worked with students through InterVarsity for many years. And in the midst of all of that, Matt, I came to realize my central passion and gift is kind of keeping company with people, having conversations with people,
mm,
and helping them figure out what God is up to in their lives, what might be the next step in their journey. That was really the fire that was always burning in my ministry in whatever context I was working. And so now I have the privilege of focusing my attention on that through the
right.
ministry of the Sozo Center in good part with our denomination. And that just continues to be a real source of joy. Yeah, I have lots of passions. The ocean is one of them, my family. I have a passion, it appears, for sports teams in red and white. So
Oh,
Detroit Red Wings are an
okay.
absolute passion. And then for those who may follow soccer or football, Arsenal in the British Premier League. And of course, in the World Cup, Canada, red and white. So I have
Yes,
a passion for those things.
that's awesome. So you
Yeah,
used the phrase keeping company with people, which
yeah.
I like. So this is what I wanted to do. I think there might be some people who are familiar with this spiritual formation, spiritual direction, but even that phrase, keeping company with people, might be a helpful phrase to unlock the idea of like, how would you explain to Louisville here or people who've never really thought about this or
Mm,
have no real idea of what it is? How would you explain spiritual direction and what you do and how you walk with people?
yeah. Thanks, Matt. Um, I think that idea of walking with people is a great expression. You talked about actually earlier walking with people on their spiritual journeys.
Mm,
And that's very much what the calling of spiritual direction is to accompany people and to help people listen to the voice of the Spirit in their lives. Because as a spiritual director, I'm not going to try to direct or order you, Matt, what you need to do in your spiritual life. But what I may be able to do as I open up myself to God when we meet
mm,
is to encourage you to hear the Spirit's voice in your life and the Spirit's direction in your life. And so typically, in the context of that relationship and accompaniment, we would meet roughly once a month or so and have really quite a focused conversation
mm,
about your life, what's really happening in your life, what's touching you the most in your life. And because often what touches us the most in our lives is where God is at work.
right.
What touches us for good, what touches us for ill, what brings comfort, what brings challenge. To have an opportunity to have a safe, confidential conversation with someone about what's really happening in life and where might God be at work in my life. Um, that's really the focus of spiritual direction.
Right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. I think it's we've chatted in the past about how like a counselor or
Mhm.
therapist can help us in one area of our life to process and to work through things. So
Mhm.
spiritual direction is not that. But
Right.
as we share, and as you and I have been getting to know each other and become more and more, as I become more and more open with you and vulnerable and trust has been built, there's obviously parts of my life and my inner workings and, family and decisions. And, you have been chatting with me as I've been processing over the last while, praying about my role here at the church. And, as we're even having this conversation, preparing in the last, just a few more Sundays here at the church. but having that person walk with you, and the priority is how do we listen to God. I'm not going to
Mm,
solve everything for you, and you've never once tried to like give the direction I'm supposed to take, but you're helping me almost arrive in this posture of awareness of what's
mm,
happening around me, like just
mm,
an extra set of eyes, extra set of ears, and an extra spirit to
mm,
maybe pay attention for themes that you're hearing me talk more often that I might not even realize, like a blind spot, like, oh, I didn't even know I was saying it like that, or
mhm.
you keep bringing this up. So I feel like it's been not only helpful to me, but that walking with people, that keeping close company.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Now, why do we need that? So
Mhm.
I know why it's been important to me, but just for an average person, like if that's what it is, why would we need that? What's the benefit of that? Is it
Yeah.
some seasons we might need it, or sometimes we don't, or why would I want to
Yeah.
explore this? Because for some, I'm sure here in the room this morning, it's a bit of a strange idea. The idea of
Yeah.
coming to a church service, fine, maybe even a small group, fine, but this may feel like, wow, that's a whole other level. So how would you explain that, or talk to us about that?
Yeah. Great question, Matt. Um, I think there is the matter of seasons that needs to be talked about. I don't assume that every Christian needs to be in a relationship of spiritual direction all of their lives.
Mm,
Um, but we all need help. We all need help on our spiritual journeys. It was John Wesley, right? There is no such thing as a solitary Christian. When you read, what Jesus calls us to, um, it is not something that we're called to do alone. We could never do it alone. We need the company of others. That's just been my experience. I need other people to faithfully follow Jesus. And I need to find the people that Jesus wants to give me to help me along in his way. And
mm,
I have just found it really helpful in most of my adult life um, to have somebody that I can really talk to in a safe, open, confidential space about life. And I love the way you described our conversations. They're kind of, you know, they're about life. They're about what's really happening, what's real. And that can be kind of religious when we're trying to discern God's will in our lives, but it might have to do with family dynamics. It might have to do with the struggles I'm having internally. It
mm,
might be with, how I might be invited to pray to God in new ways or open up my relationship to God in new ways. But the focus is always my relationship with God and this journey of transformation that Jesus calls me to. So
mm,
um, it's a beautiful practice in my experience, and I think when we get serious about following Jesus, uh, this is a way to deepen, I think, our commitment to walk with Jesus is to walk with another person who can help us on that walk.
hmm I remember a number of years ago, my wife Bobby was way ahead of me on this level of finding a spiritual director, and had such great experiences with that years ago, and was always encouraging me. I wasn't against it, Mark, but
Mm,
it's sometimes in my role or busyness of life, it never felt like it needs to be a top priority. But then I do remember when I started, it was almost like, oh man, I've actually really needed this.
right.
Um, and I remember the first time I shared with some people at the church I was pastoring previously. I think they were a bit surprised that I had a
Mm,
spiritual director, because I think in their mind, for many, well,
mm,
you're kind of helping us in this way.
mm,
Um, in some ways, it was maybe spark some curiosity. Oh, why would Matt need this or want this? But
mm,
also the opportunity to say, like, just like you said, we all need people to talk to.
right.
And it's such a there's such a big difference between speaking to a few hundred people and all
Mhm,
listening, but having a one-on-one conversation. We know that's just different. And
right.
so I could talk to a lot of people, or I could try to help as many spiritually as I can, but I'm still not a spiritual director. Like the way we have conversations, you and I, is I try to bring elements of that into conversations I have with people. But
Mhm.
there is something about recognizing we all need this and it helps in different ways.
Mhm.
So let me just go on that to you then. So you're doing this
Sure.
for so many people. How did you first discover this, decide this was kind of part of your core gifting, or maybe find your own spiritual director for the first time? Would you mind sharing as much as you feel
Yeah,
comfortable with about that?
yeah, no, I'd be happy to do that, Matt. Um, I think that door into spiritual direction opened up for me back when I was in my early 30s. I'd been involved in Christian ministry for quite a long time. Um, but I went on to seminary and
Hmm.
wanted to study. And I encountered a professor there, Dr. Jim Houston, who kind of opened up the whole area of spiritual theology, spiritual formation, spiritual direction. And he actually offered spiritual direction to us as students. I was coming out of a period in my life, Matt, where I was really active in ministry. I was teaching others, I was working with students with InterVarsity.
Hmm.
Um, but I was really struggling with prayer.
Hmm.
And I recognized that it wasn't enough just to encourage other people to pray. I needed to discover how to pray and to have a real intimate relationship with God. And I was struggling. I really
Hmm.
was. There was dryness in my spiritual life. I felt a lot of guilt about my prayer life. Um, so I really had some pretty big, intimate issues that I needed to talk about. And, conversations with Jim Houston became the place where I could bring this stuff up, reflect about it, get his advice, his perspective, his discernment, his
Hmm.
wisdom. And it was just a huge gift to me. So when I left my time of study in Vancouver and came back to Nova Scotia, high in my priority list was finding a spiritual director. And it's really remained high for the last 35 years. I tasted it, it was really
Okay.
good, and
Yeah.
I don't want to miss out on it.
Yeah.
Mm.
So you continue to meet with someone, Mark, and would it be the same person, or, or has there been different seasons where different voices have, or different listening ears have been helpful? How, like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, yeah, I have had different people.
Okay.
Actually, met just this morning. I met with my spiritual director, John. That wasn't planned. It just so
No way.
happened that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. And I've been meeting with John for the better part of 20 years. Um, and he has become such a gift to me, and our times together have been such a gift to me.
Hmm.
And, after I talk with John, I talk about anything that's important or meaningful, anything that I'm struggling with, anything that I'm grateful for. Um, and I love his perspective, his words of wisdom. I'll be honest, above all, I've just appreciated his own passion and love and desire for God and the way
Yeah.
he's committed to live out his faith. And he shares enough out of his own experience that I get a glimpse into his life and his relationship with Jesus. And invariably, I feel like I want more of that kind of deep, intimate, honest relationship with Jesus that informs the way I live. I want
Hmm.
this to be the passion of my life. And when I'm with John, that passion is just stoked and
Hmm.
encouraged. And yeah, it's just a beautiful gift in my life. And I'm
Hmm.
really, really grateful for
You know, uh, you and I are different, but I think we have similar things and we've had really great conversations. I will just say this to you, Mark, that one of the things I have already been learning and appreciate a lot about you is you've even done it on this call. Every time I say something or ask a question, you're always like, thanks for that question. Like you're so affirming and gentle in your posture.
mm,
And then when we talk about faith and life and family and all these things, you demonstrate to me like a gentle, uh, I use the phrase deep well. That's kind of one of my images of like this deep posture of like leaning into Jesus that I appreciate. I'm sure John in different ways does that to you, reminds you and points
mm,
you back to Jesus. And I feel like sometimes I can get going so quickly in my mind and my life that your kind of gentle way uh
mm,
is so it's always like every month when we talk, I'm like, oh yeah, like there's just this rhythm and it's helpful for me. I just wanted to say, I just noticed that even in this conversation, how often you were just gentle and affirming, even in the questions,
mm,
which helps me slow down. Um,
mm, mm,
this is not something I thought I was going to ask you, but over your shoulder, there are icons. And
mm,
some people don't really, especially in the Baptist world, perhaps, icons can feel mixed in with maybe a thought of like those might be bad or that's connected to a different faith tradition. This may not have anything to do with direction, but can I just ask you why you have icons in that way? And
right.
are those part of your own kind of rhythm of leaning in with Jesus awareness?
Yeah, no, thanks. Yes, they are, Matt. Actually, the icon that affects me the most is one that's right here. I have my fingers on it now, and I'm actually going to try to show it to
Yeah,
you guys.
yeah, like we see it. Okay.
Yeah, this is an icon of this is Jesus, who would be you can see him holding the Bible,
Yeah.
and an old figure, Abba Amma, I think his name was, and it's a picture of Jesus with his arm around the abbot. And the abbot was someone who had responsibility for the monks in his community. He was
Okay.
responsible ultimately for their spiritual care. And so this icon, as I offer direction to people, and often it is through Zoom, I look at it and I remember Jesus is with me.
Wow.
It's very real. He has his arm around me. I've had times giving direction with others, and this may sound kind of weird, but I'm just going to say it. I really feel like I've felt the presence of Jesus's arm over my shoulders, and he's that close, and
Hmm.
and he wants to walk that closely with everybody that I meet with, and our conversations really are about that great desire that Jesus has to walk closely and to share his life with us. And the icon um, expresses all of that to me. Um, and so it invites me into a way of living with Jesus and into a way of living with others that's pretty
Hmm.
central to my calling in life. And so the icon is very helpful in that way. It brings a kind of focus and clarity, and it inspires a kind of devotion in me.
Right.
Yeah. So
I like that you have it just
really
out
helpful.
of like you can see it, but we
Yeah.
can't see it. But even as you're talking with people,
Mhm.
and I think you're always in this room when we meet, but you're having that reminder right there for you. That's pretty cool. I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, I have a lot of questions. I'm trying to think the best way. What would you say some of those you referred to how important it was for you, and once you've tasted it, you want to keep going. And I would
Mm,
say the first spiritual director I ever had, who ended up passing away in the last meeting we had, I've shared this with you, I'm pretty sure.
mm,
She said, you have to keep going, Matt. Like, you need to
mm,
find someone else. And it took me a while before you and I have gotten connected and we moved across country and all that. But
mm,
um, what do you think are those barriers? Like it took me
mm,
a while to do it. So I would say maybe busyness for me or not realizing how good it could be once I
mm,
got going with someone. Do you notice any trends or themes when you first start connecting with people? I imagine they're first nervous in the beginning or unsure. And I know you
right.
primarily work with ministry leaders, but are there some common themes that you notice in people when they begin direction that eventually kind of fade away as they kind of taste and
Mm,
experience how helpful it can
mm.
be? Because maybe that's for some of us, even in the room, they might be like, oh, and you could probably identify what they might be feeling as a barrier to even this kind of a conversation
Right.
or experiment, if they're interested.
Hmm. Yeah, I think your experience, Matt, where busyness and the noise of life is an obstacle. It can so much be an obstacle in every dimension of our spiritual life, whatever practice it might be. And I think direction is one of those things, just to take time. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, no, I think maybe one of the obstacles that I think people commonly have to get through is just the recognition that the freedom that comes with sharing openly and vulnerably. I mean, I think this is true in friendships and family life. Um, our relationships only grow deeply insofar as we're willing to be vulnerable with one
mm,
another. My good friend John actually said to me once, where vulnerability meets vulnerability, there is intimacy.
mm,
And I think if we're willing to take that risk of being in a relationship with someone and then sharing vulnerably about what's happening in our lives, and this is a gradual process, of course, but once we do that, um, it seems to me that that's what invites us deeper is this sense, yes, there is a safe place where I can talk about things. And in particular, Matt, where I can talk about what I'm finding uncomfortable. So much
right.
of so much of my experience with my spiritual director is kind of talking about what I'm finding hard to figure out, maybe about a relationship, or maybe about a tension that I feel within myself. Um, and I need somebody's help, but nobody's going to be able to help me unless I actually talk about it and bring it out into the open. And if
Mm,
then I experience another person's gentleness, trust, um, listening, I come to realize, oh, okay, this is where God is at work in my life. So often, He's at work where there's struggle, where there's pain, where there's challenge. Of course, He's at work in the good stuff, the stuff that we love to talk about.
right.
Um, but I think so often to go deeper, we need to also move toward the pain and we need to move toward the wounds. We need to move to the challenges in our lives. And we come to realize rather than being afraid of that stuff, it's okay, Jesus, where are you in this? And how are you at work in my life, in the midst of the
Hmm.
struggle, in the midst of my wrestling with the wound in my life? And I think in direction, as we move there, the relationship deepens, the trust deepens, and the desire to continue to connect and meet
Yeah.
and to walk together deepens.
Yeah, I'd agree. That's been my experience for sure. I think the tendency we can have in community, whether it's on a Sunday morning and the kind of level of conversations, which is always limited, people
Mm,
coming and going, or even if we're in like a small group that has maybe great relationships and been together years, there's always the human tendency to only share our kind of highlight reel. Like
right.
the, and even if we do tip into some of the other things and ask for prayer, it's a very hard thing to go beyond that, right? On a spiritual level. Maybe we do that with a therapist or counselor,
Mm,
but the spiritual dynamic of kind of opening yourself up. And so
mm.
that's been my experience. Sometimes we do talk about the good things. Of course we do, and we celebrate.
Yeah,
But
important.
the sooner we get into the things that we're like wondering about or praying about or questioning or, hey, what about kind of conversations, I find that's actually the good stuff to start getting into.
Mm,
That's really helpful to have someone. Let me go this direction now. So the idea of finding a spiritual director
mm,
or going this way might be like, oh man, it's way too much for me to take. There's people in the room right now who are still exploring the idea of, do I even want to follow Jesus? I'm still exploring this.
mm, mm.
Um, so you've used the phrase before, like a spiritual friendship. So,
Right.
which is kind of some of the same things, maybe even like a half step in that direction. Can you
Mm.
explain what spiritual friendship can look like? And maybe that emerges from a small group or someone they already know within the church, or can you explain that concept? Because that still is getting at this idea of being vulnerable,
Mm.
really knowing each other, allowing someone to really know you, and
Right.
start slow, but as trust develops, being able to share more parts of yourself. And that tips into the discipline of confession we talked about a few weeks ago in this series of like in a trusted, loving, safe place, you're able to really share so that you can experience release and freedom and healing. And you're
Mm.
not holding it all yourself. So let's talk about spiritual friendship as it relates, which may feel more accessible to more people at this point in time.
Right. Great. I love that, Matt. Yeah. Spiritual friendship. I've been just so grateful myself for a small core of spiritual friends that I've walked with often through the years. Um, what is a spiritual friendship? An old definition, maybe the best, came from a medieval writer who wrote a book on spiritual friendship. And he said a spiritual friendship is a friendship where I am with another person and together we're conscious of a third presence as we meet together.
Love that.
Yeah, that Jesus is with us. So, you know, I think anytime we taste that or get a glimpse of that with somebody, there can be an invitation. Why don't we just build on that? And as you say, maybe somebody in my small group, maybe somebody in my congregation that I see and I think, wow, I love the way they're following Jesus. I'd love to have more of that. I'd love to learn more from them. And so
Mm,
why not just go out for a cup of coffee, um, go for a walk, go for a hike, and consciously make it a space where you get to have a spiritual conversation. And I don't want to mislead anybody when I talk about a spiritual conversation because it's not a narrow conversation about prayer, about church life. It's
right.
about it's about life. It's about all of life because we know that God's at work in all of it. So if there's an opportunity for me to deepen a friendship with somebody and particularly to open up my spiritual life to them, to have them open their spiritual life to me, an opportunity where we can grow together and pray together, maybe when we're together, but certainly we can pray for each other when we're on
Right.
our own, and maybe regularly connect with somebody. Maybe just do it for a few months, once a month, and just see where it goes. Yeah, I've gained a lot from those kinds of friendships. And often they can kind of plant a seed for, well, maybe I'd
Mm.
also like to have a relationship with someone on a more ongoing basis, somebody who's trained to have those sorts of conversations. And that's where the possibility of a spiritual direction relationship can open up.
I love that. So again, it was when one person's spending time, just give me that definition again. And do you
Yeah,
remember who it was who wrote that?
yeah, Aelred of Rievaulx was his name, Aelred of
Okay.
Rievaulx. And, again, he was a leader of a spiritual community of monks,
Okay.
and he was aware his central responsibility was to help other people grow in their relationship with Jesus. And he said a spiritual friendship is when I am in the presence of a friend and I'm conscious of the presence of a third person in our midst. That's a
I love
spiritual
that.
friendship. Yeah.
I love that. We
Yeah.
have a couple minutes left here. What would you say, maybe just practical words of encouragement to someone who maybe feels, like you said, stagnant in a prayer life or stagnant
Mm.
spiritually? You shared that part of your own journey, feeling like kind of stuck
Yeah.
with your prayer life, or someone who feels like God is distant right now. What any words of encouragement on kind of those people who are feeling like they're struggling a little bit?
Mhm.
The questions
Mhm.
or the doubts feel much louder right now than
Right.
the voice of God, or the victory of, or sense of like momentum spiritually feels like it's
Right.
just really stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to say in a way it hasn't really stopped. As long as you're willing to talk to Jesus about where you are. I
Mm,
think sometimes when I get stuck, I feel like, well, I've got to get to a different place or a new place if I'm going to really deepen my prayer life or feel an infusion of the Spirit's life in me. I always feel like, no, it's here, it's now. That's where God wants to meet us, and He definitely wants to meet us in our struggles, our sense of being stuck, our sense of His absence. And
mm,
so I would say the best place to start is to have a conversation with Jesus about our stuckness,
mm,
our struggles, our dryness. He longs to hear those prayers. I mean, the Psalms make it so clear. We don't have to wait to come to Jesus, no matter what state we're in. We can just
mm.
unveil our heart. And I think, really practically speaking, the other important thing, find another person that you can
Yeah.
talk to about where you are. Isolation and the loneliness that it brings is never helpful for our spiritual lives. So, um,
Mm,
yeah, just, risk that stepping out and having a conversation with someone else. Jesus wants to meet us where we are. He's not saying improve your life or, once you have a sense of my presence, come and talk to me. It's no, here, now. This is where
right.
God is at work, and He can be at work in the dryness. He can be at work in the struggle. He is at work in the dryness and the struggle. We just need to learn to see His presence there, and He'll help us do
Mm, wonderful. So maybe I can just ask you, Mark,
that. Mm,
if you'd be willing to just pray over our church right now. You know that we're in a process of transition and change coming up. The
mm,
leaders are waiting and trying to have this posture of listening and discerning what's correct and the timelines, and
mm,
lots of amazing things have been happening at the church. And there's, with any change, there's new opportunities that come with that, and that's exciting, but also some uncertainty. And people are heading into the summer, where they're here, there, and everywhere. But just on this idea, our whole series has been from that John 15 text about this intimacy, this connection, this
mm,
growth.
mm,
Life comes through connection with Jesus through all these
mm,
different patterns, and the spiritual friendship and direction is
mm.
a key part of helping us move that way. So thanks for sharing and being a part of this. But can I just
Mm.
invite you to pray for our church? That'd be incredible.
I would love to do that, man.
Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Lord, I thank you so much for your presence with us now. I pray, Lord, that as this video gets played, that your presence, your presence would be evident to your people in Louisville. Lord,
Mm,
in this season of uncertainty and openness, um, I pray that your people would sense your great desire to lead them and to guide them, to reassure them. Lord, I pray that you would give this community freedom to bring the insecurities and the uncertainty to you. Lord, that we would become a more dependent and open and humble people who
mm,
recognize our great need of you and your direction in our lives, individually and corporately. Lord, I pray your blessing upon Matt and his family in this season. Lord, I pray for the whole Louisville community. And I pray that you would give birth to seeds of hope for the good things that you have in their future.
mhm,
Lord, I pray that they would sense in this moment a call to grow closer to you, that they would root their lives in you, the vine, Jesus, and that out of that deep connection would grow great joyfulness and fruitfulness in the kingdom of God there in their community. And I pray all of these things in the strong name of Jesus. Amen.
amen. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you so much, brother. Appreciate it.
You, Matt. Yeah, thanks so much. You take
Talk
care.
soon. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.